When Melissa first suggested therapy, I thought it was her way of saving us. 10 years married, fights piling up like dirty laundry, sex colder than December, and me drinking too much on weeknights just to tune out the silence. I laughed at the idea at first, me spilling my guts to some stranger with a clipboard, but she looked at me with those tired eyes and said, "Please. If you won't do it for us, do it for me." And because I was still stupid enough to want to be her hero, I agreed. That's how I met Dr. Adrian Cole. Tall, calm voice, the kind of smile that makes you feel seen even when you're saying the dumbest shit. His office smelled like cedar and coffee, and the first thing he said was, "Nothing leaves this room unless you want it to." I believed him. God help me, I believed him. Week after week we sat there, Melissa on one couch, me on the other, Dr. Cole leaning forward like a referee who could keep the game fair. I confessed things I'd never admitted to anyone. How I felt like a ghost in my own house. How every time she flinched when I touched her, I died a little more. How I was scared she didn't love me anymore. Melissa would nod, sometimes tear up, sometimes smile at me like maybe she saw me again. And Cole would say, "That's brave. That's honest. Keep going." I left those sessions lighter, like someone had pulled stones off my chest. For the first time in years, I thought maybe we were fixing things. Maybe therapy really worked. But then came the night everything cracked. Melissa said she had a late session with Dr. Cole, just her, something about individual work. I kissed her goodbye, told her I was proud of her for taking it seriously. She smiled, soft and warm, and for the first time in months she kissed me back like she meant it. I sat on the couch that night, sipping whiskey, replaying it in my head, thinking maybe we were turning a corner. Then, at 11:42 p.m., her iPad buzzed on the coffee table. A text lit the screen. I wasn't snooping, I swear, I just glanced. And what I saw burned through me like acid. It wasn't from Dr. Cole. It was from Adrian. No doctor. Just Adrian. And it read, "I can still taste you. Next time, no talking, just you on my desk." My hands went numb. My vision blurred. The iPad slipped from my fingers onto the carpet, but the words stayed branded in my skull. The man I'd been spilling my soul to. The man I trusted with my marriage. He wasn't saving us. He was fucking my wife. I just sat there staring at the glowing screen like an idiot, my mouth dry, the whiskey glass heavy in my hand. I wanted to believe I'd read it wrong, that maybe it was some twisted therapy metaphor, but no, "I can still taste you" isn't exactly clinical language. My chest burned like someone had cracked it open and poured salt inside. I should have thrown the iPad across the room, called her right then, screamed into the phone until the neighbors woke up. But instead I froze. Because if I confronted her with nothing but a text preview, she'd spin it, twist it, call me paranoid. I knew Melissa. She could make a lie sound like scripture when she wanted to. So I did nothing. I sat there, shaking, waiting for her to come home. When she finally walked in a little after midnight, hair messy, cheeks flushed, she looked like a teenager sneaking back from a date, not a wife coming home from therapy. She smiled when she saw me awake. "You're up?" she said, hanging her coat. I swallowed glass shards and muttered, "Yeah." Couldn't sleep. She kissed my cheek, light and quick, and drifted upstairs humming some tune I didn't recognize. I followed her with my eyes, and for the first time in our marriage I felt like a stranger watching another stranger walk through my house. That night I barely slept. My head played loops of her with him. His hand on her thigh in that office chair, her laugh echoing against the bookshelves, their clothes scattered across the rug where I'd cried about losing her love. The more I thought, the more I realized it wasn't just betrayal, it was humiliation. I'd bared my soul to this man. Told him things I'd never told Melissa herself. And the whole time he was probably filing it away, using my words to get closer to her. By morning I had a plan, or at least the skeleton of one. Evidence. I needed proof no one could spin or deny. She always kept her sessions at the same time, Tuesdays and Thursdays at 7. I took off work early that Thursday, told her I'd be working late, kissed her goodbye at 6:15. She left with her purse and that same tired smile, thinking I was none the wiser. 5 minutes later I was in my car, trailing hers from a distance. She didn't go to the clinic we always used. She didn't even head in that direction. She turned down a side street, parked 2 blocks from Cole's office, and walked the rest of the way like she didn't want her car spotted. My grip on the steering wheel nearly snapped it in half. I parked near the corner, hoodie up, heart pounding, and followed on foot. Through the clinic's glass door I saw her silhouette slip inside. Lights were dim, blinds drawn. My stomach churned. I crept around the side, found a narrow alley with one lit window. The blinds weren't fully shut, just enough to make someone careless feel safe. I pressed myself against the wall and peered through the gap. And there it was. My wife. Melissa. Perched on Cole's desk, legs spread, her head thrown back in a laugh I hadn't heard in years. His hands were on her hips, his mouth on her throat, her fingers tangled in his shirt. I covered my mouth so I wouldn't make a sound while burning my throat. This wasn't a one-time slip, not some drunken mistake. They had chemistry, rhythm, history. I forced myself to pull out my phone, hands trembling so badly I nearly dropped it. I snapped photo after photo, shaky but clear enough. Her skirt hiked up, his lips on her neck, her smile wide and free. Each click felt like driving another nail into the coffin of my marriage. Then my phone buzzed in my hand, nearly making me scream. A text from Kevin, just some stupid meme. But the sound must have carried because inside, Melissa froze, turning her head toward the window. Cole followed her gaze. My blood iced. I ducked down into the shadows, pressing my face to the bricks, holding my breath until my lungs screamed. Seconds passed. The blinds rattled, then snapped fully shut. Darkness. Silence. My pulse thundered so loud I thought they'd hear it. I stayed there, crouched and shaking, until I heard the faint click of the office lock. They were coming out. I bolted down the alley, heart trying to punch through my ribs, and dove into my car just as the door swung open. Through the rearview I saw them laughing again, arms around each other, Melissa kissing his cheek like I didn't exist. Like the vows we made never happened. I gripped the wheel so hard my nails cut my palms. I had proof now. Photos, images that couldn't be explained away. But as I sat there shaking, one question burned hotter than the rage in my chest. What the hell was I going to do with it? I drove home with my hands still shaking on the wheel, the photos buzzing like hornets in my pocket, and somewhere between the red lights and the empty kitchen I made a decision that felt cold and surgical in my chest. No screaming, no drunken scene, no, how could you? Not yet. I was going to make this airtight, I was going to end him on paper before I ended him in person. I backed the photos up to 3 places, cloud, hard drive, a burner email I made in college, and printed 2 sets at the 24-hour pharmacy just to feel the weight of the truth in my hands. I can still taste you, I muttered under my breath at the printer like a curse, and the kid behind the counter wouldn't meet my eyes. Back home I started reading, not gossip, not Reddit, real shit. Ethics codes, malpractice, state board complaints. Page after page said the same thing in clinical language that made me want to laugh and throw up at the same time. Sex with a current client is a nuclear violation. Sex with a client's spouse is still a blazing conflict of interest. Coercion through confidential information is a career death sentence. Let him burn. I almost called Melissa's sister, almost called my mother, almost called the clinic and demanded the director on the line, but I swallowed it, because the second I screamed without proof they'd circle the wagons and call me unstable. So I called Kevin instead. I need you to shut up and listen, I said, voice cracking, and I told him everything in one breath, the text, the desk, the photos. He went quiet the way good friends do when they're choosing between rage and logic, then said, okay man. No confrontations. Collect. Document. If he's stupid enough to keep going, you can nail him to the wall. The plan grew out of that sentence like a dark flower. I booked an individual session with Cole for Monday at 5, the hour before our couple's slot, which I kept on the calendar with a reply that said, looking forward. I bought a tiny voice recorder at a strip mall spy shop I didn't know existed, set it to voice activation, tested it in the bathroom whispering, testing, testing, and nearly cried when it played back my own ragged breathing in perfect clarity. Monday I showed up early with a backpack like a teenager, recorder tucked in the inner pocket, red LED taped over. Cole opened the door with that calm, priestly smile, and it took everything in me not to break his nose on the threshold. Rough week, he said, warm, practiced, and I nodded like a good patient and told him about my trust issues, told him how jealousy makes me irrational, fed him the same rope he's been using to climb into my house. Halfway through I needed the bathroom, left the backpack on the floor beside the couch like an afterthought, came back and finished my performance with extra vulnerability for the notes. When the clock hit 5:55 he did the soft voice therapist wrap-up. Let's pause there, I'm proud of you for sharing, and I stood, thanked him, shook his hand longer than necessary so I wouldn't look back at the bag, and walked out with my heart beating in my throat. I got into my car, parked 3 doors down, and stared at the clinic entrance through the mirror until the sky went purple. At 6:41 Melissa slipped inside with her hair down and that blouse I used to love, and I pressed my nails into my palms so hard I left crescents. The blinds stayed shut. The lobby stayed empty. My brain screamed to run in there and set the place on fire, but the part of me that smelled blood said wait. At 8:12 the door opened and they came out in a staggered rhythm. Her first, fixing her lipstick, him second, locking the door, their bodies standing just a little too close for professional boundaries, and then they were gone, 2 saints backlit by street lamps. I didn't sleep. I didn't even lie down. I sat at the kitchen table until my spine burned, watching the clock eat minutes. At 7 a.m. I was outside the clinic before the receptionist, backpack excuse loaded. "I think I left my bag," I said when she arrived, trying to sound sheepish instead of murderous. "Therapist office 5, blue couch," and she found it exactly where I'd left it, the recorder tucked silent in its pocket like a beating heart. I drove to a park, killed the engine and pressed play. Static, the soft thud of the door, Cole's voice, smooth as cream. "He's getting suspicious." Melissa's laugh, lower than she ever uses with me. "He's always been suspicious. He just needed something to obsess over." My grip tightened on the steering wheel until it popped. Papers rustled, a zipper, then the wet sound of kissing, my wife's breath catching, my skull ringing like a bell. "We have to be careful with the notes," he murmured. "If he blows up, I need documentation. Irritability, intrusive thoughts, possible aggression." "So you're building a file on him," she said, amused, and he chuckled. "I'm protecting you. If he goes nuclear, we push therapeutic separation and suggest she stays somewhere safe. Judges love that language." Chair scraped. Her voice dropped to a whisper that still cut like a knife. "He told you about the bar fight in college, put that in there. Make him look volatile. If he comes at us, he's finished." I was breathing so fast the recording picked it up, my own ghost panting over their words. Then there was a hard, ugly silence and Melissa said, almost sweet, "Do you think he'll ever find out I read his intake forms before our first session?" Cole laughed. "He already gave me the map to his head. You just handed me the keys." Fabric moved. A dull thud. Her voice blurred by a kiss. "Lock the door." I stabbed the stop button with my thumb, staring at the windshield while the world went white around the edges, and for a full minute I heard nothing but the tick of my hazard lights and my own heartbeat. When the ringing faded, I hit play again from a later chunk, and this time their voices were razor clear. "Tonight we'll steer him toward accountability," Cole said, pen tapping. "If he admits he's been checking devices, that's our entry to label him controlling." Melissa sighed like she was bored. "Then after the session, my place?" A pause, the smile audible. "My desk," he said, soft and filthy. The file ended there, not because they stopped but because my hands were shaking so hard I dropped the recorder to the floor mat, and I realized what the 6 p.m. couple's work had already become, a trap they were building with my own words as lumber, and I was walking into it in less than 2 hours with photos in my pocket and a head full of murder. By the time I got home my teeth hurt from clenching so hard, jaw locked like I'd been chewing glass for hours. I set the recorder on the kitchen table, stared at it like it was a loaded gun because in a way it was. Proof. Not suspicion, not paranoia. Proof. I poured whiskey into a mug just to keep my hands from shaking, but it didn't work. Every sip just made the rage burn hotter. At 5:30 Melissa came downstairs, hair brushed, lips red, wearing that same blue blouse she'd worn for Cole last week. She smiled like nothing was wrong, like we were a normal couple getting ready for therapy, and asked if I was ready to go. My throat nearly snapped shut, but I forced a nod, grabbed my jacket, and followed her out like a condemned man walking to the gallows. The drive to the clinic was a blur. She hummed along to the radio, tapped her nails on the wheel, looked every bit the devoted wife. I watched her profile out of the corner of my eye and wondered how many times she'd driven this same route with her mind already in his office, on his hands, his mouth, his desk. My stomach twisted. When we pulled up to the building I nearly bolted, but the recorder in my pocket felt like armor. I had them. I just needed to decide how to use it. Cole welcomed us with that same calm voice, the same practiced warmth that now sounded like poison in my ears. "Good to see you both," he said, gesturing us inside. Melissa smiled, slid into her spot on the couch, and I lowered myself onto mine, fists jammed into my knees. He opened his notebook, glanced at me and asked, "How have things been since we last met?" My head roared with 1,000 answers. "I know you're fucking my wife. I know you're building a file to destroy me. I know you tasted her while I was crying in this very room. But what came out was a strangled, fine. Busy." He nodded, scribbled something down and shifted to Melissa. "And for you?" She crossed her legs, her skirt inching higher, and said, "He's been distant. On edge." I nearly laughed out loud. On edge? She'd built the edge and pushed me off it. Cole leaned toward me, voice calm. "Do you think you've been distant?" That was the moment I realized the trap in real time. He wasn't asking, he was baiting, laying down words I'd later see typed in his notes. Distant. On edge. Irritable. My pulse thundered. I wanted to flip the table, to scream the truth in both their faces. Instead I leaned forward, forced my voice steady and said, "Actually, I've been keeping a journal. tracking my moods, my thoughts. That threw them. Melissa's eyes flickered, Cole's pen paused. I pulled out a plain black notebook I'd picked up at a gas station an hour earlier and set it on the table. Helps me remember what's real, I added. Cole smiled politely, but I saw the twitch at the corner of his mouth. Melissa crossed her arms, lips pressed tight. The session limped along after that, Cole trying to steer me into admissions, Melissa adding little digs, but I parried each one with something from my journal. They couldn't pin me. At the end, Cole did his usual wrap-up, soft and soothing, and Melissa chimed in. Maybe he could try being more open, less controlling. My nails dug into my palms, but I smiled thin and said, I'll work on that. When we got home, she poured herself wine, curled on the couch, and scrolled through her phone like the evening had been productive. I went upstairs, locked the door, and pulled out the recorder. I listened again to every filthy laugh, every whispered plan, every manipulation they'd plotted against me. By the time the last clip ended, I wasn't shaking anymore. I was calm, cold, focused. I had their voices. I had their faces. I had everything I needed to burn them both down. And for the first time since this nightmare started, I felt something close to control. By Friday, I'd listened to that recording so many times I could recite every word in their voices, every smug laugh, every filthy whisper. It stopped sounding like my wife and her therapist. It sounded like two strangers dissecting my life while I sat blindfolded in the corner. I knew rage alone wouldn't win. If I stormed into Cole's office and smashed his face in, they'd have me in cuffs by sundown and Melissa crying on the stand about her unstable husband. If I confronted her at home, she'd twist it, gaslight me until I doubted my own ears. No, I needed a stage. Somewhere they couldn't lie their way out. The idea hit me in the middle of the night when I was scrolling through my phone, bleary-eyed and drunk on adrenaline, the couples group therapy session. Once a month, Cole hosted a support circle with 4 or 5 couples in his big conference room. I remembered how proud Melissa looked when she told me we'd been invited, like it was some honor. What better place to drag them into the light than in front of other witnesses, his colleagues down the hall, his clients sitting in a circle? He couldn't spin it as a paranoid outburst. He'd be cornered with his own voice playing back for everyone. I spent all day Saturday preparing. I bought a cheap Bluetooth speaker, small enough to hide in my jacket. I copied the most damning clips. Him talking about building a file to make me look dangerous, her admitting she fed him details from my intake forms, both of them laughing about his desk. I trimmed the audio so there was no mistaking what they meant. No excuses. No escape. Melissa didn't suspect a thing. She floated around the house humming, pouring wine, sending texts she thought I couldn't see. At one point she leaned into the kitchen and asked if I was nervous about the group meeting Sunday. I nearly laughed in her face. Nervous? I was sharpening the axe. I told her I was fine, kissed her cheek, and felt my stomach turn when she smiled back like nothing was wrong. Sunday evening we drove to the clinic together, her hand resting on my knee, my jacket heavy with the little black speaker. I watched her out of the corner of my eye, wondered if she had any idea the walls were about to collapse. She just checked her lipstick in the mirror, adjusted her blouse, and looked every bit the concerned wife ready to fix her marriage. The group met in a wide room with chairs in a circle, a fake plant in the corner, soft lighting meant to make everything feel safe. 4 couples already sat waiting, some awkward, some smiling politely. Cole stood near the center, greeting each pair with that same warm voice, his eyes landing on me for a fraction too long. I swear he knew something was off, but he still shook my hand and said, "Glad you both could make it." Melissa beamed at him, subtle, the kind of smile that makes your stomach flip if you don't know better. We sat. The session began. Cole guided the group through introductions, little check-ins, couples sharing surface-level struggles. My pulse thudded in my ears, hands tight in my lap, waiting for my moment. Melissa leaned into the role perfectly, concerned, articulate, a model wife painting me as distant, irritable, jealous. A few people nodded sympathetically and I almost laughed. If only they knew. Then Cole turned to me. "Do you want to share your perspective?" His voice was smooth, inviting, the same tone he probably used right before kissing my wife. My hand slid into my jacket pocket. My thumb found the button on the speaker. I looked around the circle, let the silence stretch until every eye was on me. "Yeah," I said, my voice calm, steady. "I think it's time everyone heard the truth." And with that I pressed play. The room filled with static first, a faint hiss that made everyone shift in their seats, and then his voice came through clear as if he were standing right there, but colder, slicker. "He's getting suspicious." I watched Cole's smile freeze on his face, pen slipping slightly from his fingers. Melissa's head snapped toward me, eyes wide, color draining from her cheeks. The other couples glanced around confused, not sure if this was part of some exercise. Then Melissa's laugh came through the speaker, low and intimate. He's always been suspicious. He just needed something to obsess over. Gasps rippled around the circle. A woman 2 chairs down covered her mouth. A man muttered, "Holy shit." I kept my eyes locked on Cole, who had gone pale but still tried to mask it with a thin smile. He started to speak. "Let's pause here, this seems like," but the recording cut him off, his own voice again, sharp, unmistakable. "If he blows up, I need documentation." Irritability, intrusive thoughts, possible aggression. One of the husbands leaned forward, eyebrows raised. "Wait, are you talking about him?" he asked, pointing at me. I let the silence answer. Melissa shifted, panic in her eyes, and then her voice played again. "Do you think he'll ever find out I read his intake forms before our first session?" Laughter followed. "He already gave me the map to his head. You just handed me the keys." The room erupted. A woman stood up, shaking her head in disgust. "Are you kidding me? We trusted you," she shouted at Cole. One of the men muttered something about calling the board, his face red with anger. Melissa reached for my arm, whispering harshly, "Turn it off please, for God's sake," but I jerked away like her touch burned. I let the last clip roll, Cole's voice low, intimate. "Tonight we'll steer him toward accountability. If he admits he's been checking devices, that's our entry to label him controlling." And Melissa again, sighing, bored. "Then after the session, my place?" Cole's final reply dripped with filth. "My desk." The room went dead silent. No one breathed. No one moved. Just the faint buzz of the speaker as the clip ended. Then chaos. One couple grabbed their things and stormed out, muttering about lawsuits. Another started yelling at Cole, calling him a predator. He tried to speak, to raise his hands in calm, but his mask had cracked wide open and nothing he said mattered. Melissa sat frozen, eyes shining with tears that looked more like panic than remorse. She leaned close and hissed, "You don't know what you've done." I finally turned to her, voice shaking but steady enough. "Yeah, I do. I stopped being your patient. I stopped being your fool." Cole tried to leave, but one of the husbands blocked the door, phone out, already recording. "No one's leaving until the cops get here," he snapped. The room was a storm, voices rising, phones out, evidence piling up with every second. And for the first time in weeks I felt something I thought I'd lost for good: power. Melissa stared at me like she was seeing a stranger. Maybe she was. And as the sirens wailed faint in the distance, getting closer, I realized this was only the beginning. The truth was out. But the fallout? That was still coming. The sirens grew louder until they screamed outside the building, red and blue lights bouncing through the frosted windows. The room went from chaos to stunned silence as 2 uniformed officers pushed through the door. One of the other husbands immediately stepped forward, shoving his phone into their hands. "You need to hear this," he said, voice trembling with fury. Cole tried to smooth it over, calm smile pasted back on, but his face was gray and sweating. "This is all a misunderstanding," he stammered, private recordings taken out of context. But the officer cut him off. "Sir, you'll have time to explain downtown." The words hit the room like a hammer. Someone clapped, another muttered, "Finally." One of the wives glared at Melissa and hissed, "How could you?" before storming out. Melissa sat stiff in her chair, eyes glassy, jaw tight, refusing to look at me. The officers cuffed Cole right there in front of everyone. He tried to protest, voice breaking, but the audio still hissed from the Bluetooth speaker on the floor, his own words echoing in the background. The predator mask had finally slipped off for good. When they hauled him out, the room emptied fast, couples grabbing bags, whispering about lawsuits and complaints to the board. Soon it was just me and Melissa in the circle of empty chairs, the fake plant drooping in the corner, the silence heavier than any shouting could have been. She finally turned to me, lips trembling. "You don't understand, you've ruined everything." I laughed, a raw, broken sound. "No, Melissa. You ruined everything when you let him put his hands on you in the same room where I begged you to love me again." She shook her head, tears spilling. "It wasn't like that, it wasn't." I cut her off with a snarl. Don't you dare twist this. I heard you both. You betrayed me and you used my pain as foreplay." Her shoulders slumped. For the first time in weeks she looked small, stripped of the smugness, the lies, the little games. Just a woman caught naked in the wreckage she built. "So what now?" she whispered. I stood, slipping the recorder back into my pocket. "Now, you call a lawyer. Because I'm done. There's no fixing this." Her mouth opened, closed, no words coming, just silent sobs as I walked past her and out into the night air. The sirens were fading now, Cole already gone in the back of a cruiser, his career finished, his reputation scorched. My marriage? That was ashes too. But as I stood there under the flashing lights, cold air filling my lungs, I realized something I hadn't felt in months. Freedom. I wasn't her project anymore. I wasn't his patient anymore. I was done being their pawn. And as I walked to my car, the weight of the recorder heavy in my pocket, I promised myself one thing. I'd never let anyone hold my truth hostage again.